We did get a new statement from Attorney General Todd Rokita on Thursday, who said, quote, "Our office remains determined to fight for the lives of the unborn." And he said this law, in his view, provides a reasonable way to begin doing that. We also spoke with the executive director of Women for Change Indiana.
There were doctors that were not able to provide their patients with necessary health care and waiting. And now they can get that, and that's incredible.
Meantime, the abortion debate also front and center ahead of this year's midterms. And this week, I spoke with the candidates in the 9th Congressional District, an open seat featuring former GOP State Senator Erin Houchin and her Democratic opponent, Matthew Fife. First, here's part of our interview with former Senator Houchin. Are you concerned at all that there could be political consequences for Republicans this year because of this ruling and because of the new laws that we've seen enacted here in Indiana and elsewhere?
Well, I'm pro-life, and I haven't been shy about working on those issues in the legislature. I do think that the Roe decision was correct in that it brought it back to the states. I don't think
the Dobbs decision.
The Dobbs decision,
right.
And that it brought it back to the states. And I don't think that we will see too many ramifications from that, certainly not in the southern part of the state where I'm running. But it is something that we'll watch. I think that Americans are not with the majority of the Democrats in Washington that have voted for the extreme position of abortion on demand all the way up to the 9th month of pregnancy. But when we're in the district, we're mostly hearing about inflation, border security and public safety, education, those kitchen table issues that really impact the lives of human beings.
On abortion, some of your former GOP colleagues in the State House had called for an abortion ban with no exceptions for rape. If you'd still been in the legislature, would you have supported such a move?
I would have voted for the legislation that passed most recently. And I had a bill that I filed at the beginning part of session that was 15 weeks. It was modeled after the Mississippi law that was the decision. Again, I think that's probably where the majority of Americans are. If I were there, I probably would have supported that. One thing I would say is that I'm for saving as many lives as possible, and that includes taking care of the unborn and their mothers.
Senator Lindsey Graham had recently proposed new limits on abortion nationwide instead of leaving the issue up to the states, which had been the rallying cry for many years, to let the states decide. Where do you stand on this? Would you support nationwide abortion restrictions if elected to Congress?
I think it should be made on a state-by-state basis. I think the best government is closest to the people, and that's where they can weigh in on these issues. And so, I do think we have things like the Hyde Amendment that you'll continue to see Republicans in Congress advocating to keep, but the government closest to the people is always best.
I think at a national level, we need to have one law and we need to codify Roe. I think it's ridiculous that your geography, whether you live on one side of a state line or not, depends what type of health care you're going to get. Additionally, if we want to support healthy families, if we want to support safe pregnancies, we need to make sure that we're educating folks, that we're giving good access to contraceptives, that we're giving good access and affordability to OBGYNs, especially in rural areas, that we're giving paid parental leave policies and childcare policies. And those are things that I stand for and have the entire race. And those are things that my Republican colleagues have not. On the other side of the aisle, they have voted against recently. Stand for family values. If you're somebody who's kind of on the defense and deciding, yes, I want to see people safely be able to decide when to have a child.
Your opponent has called for Congress to go the other direction, to codify Roe into law. He was also critical of your meeting this summer with former President Trump, which came the same week as the search at Mar-a-Lago, the former president meeting with Representative Banks, Sparks. You were at that meeting there as well. Your opponent said there are a lot of voters concerned about your close ties to the former president, in his words, as he undergoes this investigation. What's your response to that?
So I was invited to go to that as a candidate by Congressman Banks, who represents the northern part of Indiana. That's an opportunity I'm going to take, just to hear out our former president, and we wanted to speak with him about our priorities, the issues that we're hearing about from constituents. I don't think that it's ever wrong to have conversations, and conversations move the dialogue and often drive us to different places. So,
are you concerned about what you've heard in terms of the investigation, the documents that may have been kept there at Mar-a-Lago?
I've not been concerned about that, and the president honestly wasn't concerned and not fearful of what was there. But we'll continue to watch it. We want a responsible government. We want just as we're holding other government officials accountable, we should have accountability. But, I won't shy away from having a meeting. Those conversations are always fruitful.
Do you think that it's something that's concerning at all to voters in the 9th District with the former president currently being investigated?
Yeah, there are a lot of voters who are concerned about that she's very closely tied to the president, especially as he's going through investigation, and that she will not be fair when there. Additionally, I actually find it most interesting that she touts to be close to the president and yet didn't post the picture herself. She seems to kind of toe this line between wanting to be politically savvy and yet not necessarily picking one side or the other. And I think that's the kind of thing that this campaign, wanting to go to Congress and do some good for neighbors, for students, not taking big money. I think that's one clear division, is the political savviness versus the, on one side, my opponent, versus just the going there to do some good, to make sure that we don't have this division in our country, and to make sure that we're helping.
Republicans often get asked about former President Trump, and Democrats now also on the campaign trail facing questions about whether or not they think President Biden should run for re-election in 2024. Would you support him? What do you think of the job he's done in the White House so far?
I'll be honest, I'm going to work with whatever president's there to help Hoosiers. I need to make it past these next 2 months before I can even think about the next 2 years.
All right, we've got more of those interviews online. Meantime, a lot happening this week in the nation's capital, including the House passing the Electoral Reform Act to try and prevent another January 6th situation in the future. We also saw the Indiana congressional delegation with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi this week at a bill signing to rename the VA Center in northern Indiana after late Representative Jackie Walorski.
Every veteran who receives care in that VA clinic, in fact, any VA clinic, knows that this identification with her is one of the most sincere and well-deserved nature.
The bill passed the House and Senate unanimously. It's now on the president's desk for his signature. Coming up next on this week's edition of In Focus, Senator Mike Braun leaning toward a run for governor. According to recent reports, we'll talk about it with our panel and the domino effect that could set off within our congressional delegation. And the latest news on the race for Secretary of State. 3 candidates with a military background, one of them now responding to the latest controversy on the campaign trail about his service. That's coming up next.